Hey everybody, here's another restoration on the table. This was found with that Smith carbine the other day. Also left in an attic. It is a Remington Rolling Block in 43 Spanish, but a carbine version. There's no US markings on it, so it's not a US military arm, as far as I can tell. But in 43 Spanish typically means it was for an outside service to someone. So we're going to do the same thing we did with that Smith carbine. We're going to take this all down. We're going to clean it and boil it exactly like we did with the other parts. And we are going to steel wool this wood and get it cleaned up just like the other one. Typically with these guys, there's a lot less parts to them, so they are a lot easier to take apart. So we could pretty much dive right in. I'm not going to oil any of these per se at this point unless something really fights me, because typically they're not really torqued down that hard. So we'll start by seeing if we can take off the wood, which these have a little barrels band spring underneath. Everything should come apart relatively easy on these. There's the band. There is a crack in the wood under here. So we'll run some acryglass on there just to shore that up so it doesn't grow if this was to drop at all. The metal under the barrel is nice and shiny bright. And looks like a B marking right there. I don't know if it's coming up or not, but I don't see any other markings under the wood. There is a P right here. Proof mark. And when we do some cleaning, some other parts and pieces might show up or come out of this. So we'll put this in the vise. We'll take some of the stock screws off. Finding the best place to grab is sometimes the hardest part. Should be the right size. Yeah, these are all very loose. Stubborn little guy. There we go. Screw looks good. So there is a number 25 on this wood here, but no markings up on top, nothing on the butt plate, no markings underneath. But the wood is cracked. So it's cracked right here, going down along the inside. So we will definitely do something to put that better and shore that up. I'll do some acryglass. That's just from the temperatures. These being stored in an attic, that wood is swelling and contracting constantly with the temperature. That's what causes those cracks. Not a drop, not necessarily a hit. These don't have a ton of recoil, so it's definitely not doing that. So not being stored in an attic will definitely help it. All right, we'll take off this guy over here. Let's just move you over. We'll put the pads in, set this up. Anybody who's working on stuff like this, whether it be guns or anything that's soft, just get yourself some wood. I usually wrap some loose carpet or something around the wood. It just acts as a better thing to grab, so you're not marring things up that you got to repair later on. Okay, I'll just pop these guys off here. Someone's definitely been in here before. These screws are all somewhat rounded off, and they're definitely not tight. So I don't know if someone did take this apart or if they just attempted. These come apart pretty easy. There's not that many parts to these. But there you go, there's a screw where the threads are on top. Imagine trying to make that by hand. Yeah, these are barely hanging on. We can just push this one out with our fingers. But before we do that, we'll take that mainspring off. So remember, we got to depress mainsprings in order to get them off. This one we might not have to. I'm trying to remember the last time I took one apart. Yeah, we'll take the bottom half off. See how tight these are. Not tight at all. Sometimes you gotta grab the head of that with a screw pair of grips. Take it totally all the way out. But we want to drop this lower half off. That spring is definitely hanging on. Okay. Just a little tight in there. It's really hanging on. A little burr on there. Usually these have a serial number on the bottom of them, and this one does. Looks like 226. 19329. There's a C on here. That's probably for the carbine. But there's definitely rust down on that, and we want to definitely get rid of that cancer. But the trigger looks good, the sear looks good. These springs have great tension on them, so we'll take all those springs off. I usually don't boil springs. It's not going to hurt them by that heat, but I never trust that, so I just don't put them in heat. Now with the tension off of everything, we can take these. These should just slide right out. Everything falls right through. This guy will have an extractor on it. The breech face is pretty good. Firing pin still floating. It's not broken. Unscrew this. And then we'll take this out. That's holding in the extractor, because any gunk that's left in there we'll want to get rid of. See all these screws, we didn't have to soak anything with oil. It didn't look like there was any severe rust or anything on here holding them in. The extractor looks pretty good. It's not broken, it's not chipped. It's in good shape. So that's it, it's stripped. There's not much to it. Breech face looks nice. It's a little dirty down there, but not too bad. It's definitely been much worse. I'm going to leave this stud on. We're not going to take that off, but this rear sight is loose. So we'll see if we can, that'll come out easily. And it will. We'll just clean those threads up a little before we put it back on. So this will be a good contender to just boil down quickly and throw in. A lot of the writing here is worn severely. But we'll see what comes back out of it after it's all cleaned. We'll see some of it, but obviously we're not going to bring back something that's not there. And we'll see if we can draw up any other markings that might have been on here. And we'll take it from there. So we'll head up to the pot, boil everything, and I'll bring you guys back as they come out of the pot. So everything's out of the pot. It's been in there for an hour. So we'll take a look and see what that rust is starting to do. Kind of looks similar before, because this barrel was in the white, so it doesn't have like a blued background to really see how that rust converts. But a lot of it is up and off, which means it looks kind of like dusty, like you just blew sawdust over it. That's how it should look. So that all that will cart off, and we'll take a look and see what we got left. So the under part of the barrel that was really bright, you know, that gets kind of darkish kind of color. But we'll see what we can get. And as it's done, take a look and see how it turned out. If it's got to go back in, we'll put it back in. Let's start here. Here's everything cleaned off. So one thing that I can say is when you boil these, when rust converts, it turns dark on its host metal that it's joined to. So you will see dark spots on here where the rust is gone. It's still not rust, but it darkened the metal that it left from. So you can see where that barrel band was right there in the center, and underneath where that rear sight is. It kind of looks a little darker compared to the rest of stuff around it, but that's just from that host metal turning dark. So what we can do is you get some like 2000 or 3000, whatever high number grit sandpaper, and if this is rough, you can wipe it over it, but this is actually pretty smooth. So I'm just gonna leave it alone. The butt plate actually turned out quite well. Most everything came off of it. There's little spots up here that you can't get with the wheel, so we get under there with little brass brushes and we scrub everything off. Trigger guard looks very nice. Nice and bright. Its serial number there, which is a C, looks to be like 82. And all these little parts, beautiful. They're back to their, not shiny white, but a somewhat white. Because that's what this gun was. It was in the white. The serial number is back here on that. Pretty hard to make out. It's pretty mangled. But it's there. And then that B. Let me hit a P over here. Boom. That's really nice now. I didn't see any other markings on the barrel. That was it. Oh, and these markings on the tang. That would have been right this way. Most of them are pretty worn off. But there's still something there. The bore is actually pretty dark yet, but we'll brush it out and it will definitely clean up pretty well. There isn't anything too bad in there, but for the most part, those parts came out pretty good. So I'll take it back down, we'll get the final little cracks and crevices cleaned out, and then we'll oil everything. Back from cleaning. All right, we got to put all this stuff back together now. I did take a little bit of 800 sandpaper and just wipe over this just to get some of the grime that well, not grime, but the staining from when we boiled that rust off of everything. So I've put this back together just because it's a pain in the butt to do it on camera, but I wanted to at least give you how it goes back. You put this sear in first. There's just a pin that holds it through. And then you can put the sear spring underneath in. Then you put your trigger back on, and that just sits in there through that pin, and then your trigger spring. And then everything should be under somewhat of spring tension when you press on it. That way you can just pop everything back through on the bottom. But we looked at our extractor. There was nothing wrong with that. So that can slide back in. And put that screw to it. That screw just has a little nipple that sticks off the end of it. Extractor's on. Let's see if this rear sight tightens back up. It should. That cleaned up pretty well. I think that was the rear sight screw. No, that's the side one. That's the rear sight screw. A lot of these screws are the same size. So I just took a steel brush and wiped around the threads on a lot of these screws. Just helps clean them up a little bit. All right, that's on there nice and tight. And then we want to turn that on its side. Now we're just going to line everything back up. So that's backwards. These have a little rim on the back, and that helps to hold them in place. But before we drop that down, this plate actually sits just underneath them. Actually, they come in from the other side. That rim captures them. That's what it was. It sits on top of those. Forgot. It sits on top, keeps them pushed down in there. So that is our locking for those pins. Probably have to screw this on first before putting those locking rims on. We'll see if it'll go around. Yeah. Goes around there. And that screw with the threads on top is what holds it in. Okay, now we can put this guy back in on the bottom. We need to make sure that this sear engages with the bottom of the block. So when you're pushing it in, you should feel some spring tension. Holds that, and then we'll do a function check. We don't have the mainspring on. We actually forgot to put that guy in. So we'll need this on because that's got to come up and engage under the hammer at the same time. So I'm just trying to line up these screw holes. Let's tap them down. Now we got everything in that we can function check. And I'm not going to torque these screws down. They shouldn't be. This gun doesn't need to hold a lot of pressure like that. They're not going to walk out. And go slow with these old screws. If for some reason there's still crud or something in there, you don't want to cross thread that. All right, so that's our action back together. Rolling blocks are pretty simple. And our little extractor comes out. And everything is good there. So the only thing that's left to do is our wood. Put a little oil on it. See how that looks. I'm going to use that same oil we did with the Smiths. What I'm putting on is just a little true oil. This stuff is some of the best. There, you don't need a lot. Little goes a long way. Just get everything down in there. If you got dents in the wood like this here, just make sure it soaks down into them. And this will rejuvenate this old dry wood in no time. But we leave, the steel wool helps to leave some of the character and those little dark spots. We didn't take any wood away, so like that number 25 there, we didn't round it out at all. And make sure you get a lot on the back here where this is dry. And this might need another once over with some more oil. This wood is just so dry, it's got to drink something in. Otherwise it's going to end up splitting and cracking more than what it already has. But I'll go back and but I'll put some Acker glass down in there just to keep that crack from swelling if for some reason it gets more moisture and while it's on the gun. That stuff works wonders. It really does a great job. And you can find it anywhere. Now this handguard, as I put the steel wool on it, it was still pretty dark under there actually. So whether it was stained from oil or it had a different stain on it than the buttstock, probably not, but it just seemed to stay dark even though we were on it with the steel wool. There. Now that looks nice and even. It's very smooth wood too. There's must just be a lot of oil in it. Feels almost slippery. But it should be close enough in a match. So we'll get this put on here. These only have one tang bolt. I don't want to over tighten that too much and hurt that wood underneath. I don't want it to crack or split. Put a little on this metal too, won't hurt it. Our barrel band, I'm going to put a little oil, just that's on my hands, on the inside of this barrel band. It's going to help it. And that's all that keeps it on. Perfect. And our butt plate. So these screws are actually beautiful on the inside. They almost look new. Some people will put wax on those screws as they go down into the wood. You can. It's definitely not going to hurt anything. I'm not on this one just because these holes are really good in the wood, meaning that they're not wobbled out or anything like that. I'll just sit this down and get some leverage on it. But if you got a hole in your wood that's really wide open and the screw isn't going in there too well, put a little wax on there. It will definitely help protect that. But these are still going in somewhat tight, which is great. Okay, so we got them on there. But that's, I'll put the little swing swivel in, but that's it. We got a nice refurbished, got the rust off of it, and all this is going to do is preserve it. So if you hang it up, just oil it about once a year, run a little oily rag over it. But you got a nice carbine back to be preserved. All right, guys, as soon as we find another one, we'll be back to do it again.